I think it had to come because we'd taken it to the United Nations. Lula is a great figure. You've got to understand that when he was president, he dragged 20 million people out of dire poverty by what was called the Bolsa Familia program, in which he insisted that money go to wives, not to husbands, if they could get their kids inoculated and get them to school. So he is a formidable figure. And the case that he was involved in, his lawyers contacted me about 5 years ago to come and see him because I had done the leading international law case on what amounts to judicial bias. And it was extraordinary to watch this judge who was politically motivated, out for himself, who railroaded Lula, and then, of course, got his reward when Bolsonaro made him Minister of Justice. So it was an extraordinary story, but clearly there was bias, and the so-called corruption charge wouldn't be regarded as corruption at all in this country. And so it was a great pleasure these last 2 weeks. There have been two judgments, one saying that he shouldn't have been tried in Sergei, in the area where he was, and secondly, that the judge was biased, which he certainly was. And I think the final decision is that Lula will be found innocent and able to stand again against Bolsonaro.
And do you think the political climate in Brazil at the moment, which is reeling from the pandemic and Bolsonaro's sort of bravado around it, influenced the judicial process in any way?
Well, Bolsonaro is worse than Trump. There are 300,000 deaths so far in Brazil. It's the worst hit in the world because Bolsonaro insisted on calling it just a little flu and wouldn't bring in any kind of mask-wearing rules or anything like that. And of course, he's allowed the destruction of large swathes of the Amazon, which puts us all at risk. So it's the lungs of the world. So he's been worse than Trump. And I think Brazil is finally coming to realize that. And Lula has massive loyalty and support from 50% of the population, the poorer 50% who love him. And, well, he's 75, but Joe Biden will be 79. So it's...
There's good precedent.
Politically, it's time for old men. And so, although he's been a bit, he hasn't said so, but everyone hopes, I think, that he will stand and his popularity will, as it did in the elections of 2018. I got an order from the United Nations Tribunal that he should be allowed to stand because his conviction hadn't been finalized. And Brazil simply ignored it. And at the time, he had twice as many votes in the opinion polls as Bolsonaro. So he would have won had he been allowed to stand, which he should have, in 2018. And I think the hope is that next year he will stand.
Yes, and he's certainly weighing into the political process at the moment. You know, you pointed out during your involvement in this case just how antiquated Brazilian law is. Do you think a case like this gives them cause to rethink and potentially reform in some way the judicial process?
Yes, it's a very primitive legal system based on the Spanish Inquisition, which Spain and all the other European countries have abandoned. But it allows the investigator, the prosecutor, to become the judge. And it is bizarre. So the investigating judge then becomes the judge. It's like having the policeman who arrests you take off his helmet and put on a wig, because he then convicts you because he's convinced of your guilt. So that is, I think, that will result in the reform of the system. The case that I did some years ago in the European Court against Denmark caused a revision of the old inquisitorial system in Europe. So I hope it will do so in Brazil.
Indeed. He could, though, face retrial, Lula.
Yes, that's possible, and I think he'd be acquitted because, as I say, the evidence doesn't amount to corruption. His wife owned an apartment, and the owners of the building offered her a better one, which Lula didn't want to accept, never became registered in the title, did no favors for anyone. There was no quid pro quo involved. So I would expect in a fair trial that he would be acquitted. But frankly, I don't know that Brazil really wants to go down this road. The convictions have been quashed, and it would be great if the Brazilians had a real choice for someone who has a track record, an amazing track record. President Obama declared him the most popular politician in the world. And so I think that would set Brazil on the road to recovery.
Tell me something. When you take on a case like this, do you consider whether he was corrupt or whether there was any truth to it, or do you just look at the merits of the justice?
That came later. I was satisfied that there was demonstrable bias in the case, so I took it on. But when I went and met Lula and examined the evidence, I became satisfied that he wasn't corrupt. I would have taken it on anyway because of, I believe, in fair trial. But the first thing I did when I visited him at his rather modest apartment was to check on the taps. I always find that politicians, particularly with gold taps in their bathroom, I think that's a pretty good sign of corruption.
I hate to think what you think of Donald Trump's home then.
Yeah, full of gold taps.